Welcome on board, chosen one. Let's get something straight immediately. You were never too much. You were never trying too hard. You were never lucky. That was just the easiest excuse they could find to avoid admitting the truth. The truth is simpler and far more uncomfortable for them. You were operating on a level they could not reach, and instead of climbing, they tried to pull you down. You remember what they said? Don't pretend you don't. Nobody's this smart. Said with a laugh, said like a joke, said like a warning wrapped in fake praise. When they said it, they weren't impressed. They were threatened. When they said it, they were really saying, slow down, make us feel safe, stop exposing the gap. Look who's quiet now. Look who's watching from a distance. Look who suddenly changed their tone. Oh, the legend needs to bow now. Funny, when they had the chance, they told you to sit down. They said it in school when you finished early and stared at the clock, bored out of your mind. They said it at work when you saw patterns others missed and fixed problems nobody even understood yet. They said it in conversations when your words landed too clean, too sharp, too accurate. And every time they followed it with the same move, dismissal, minimizing, mockery disguised as humor. Here's the cold fact they never wanted to face. Intelligence like yours doesn't shout. It observes, it waits, it adapts, and when it moves, it's already 10 steps ahead. You felt the cost of that. The isolation, the strange loneliness of always understanding what's happening before it happens, watching people argue about things you already solved in your head, holding back, editing yourself, shrinking your thoughts just to survive socially. That pain wasn't random. That was the price of being ahead of the curve in a world that worships averages. And now the atmosphere has changed. Notice the silence. Notice how the joke stopped. Notice how the same people who doubted you suddenly always believed in you. That silence isn't peace, it's aftermath. You're standing where battles end. They're standing where excuses begin. Their efforts look loud but empty. Yours looks quiet but permanent. That contrast is doing all the talking now. Before we go any further, pause for half a second. If this message already feels uncomfortably accurate, press the like button and subscribe. Not for me, for you. That's how you strengthen this voice, this space, this collective of people who refuse to play small anymore. Consider it paying the message back and stepping fully into the mission. Now, let's go deeper. They said, nobody's this smart. And they were right. Nobody is. Nobody doubts themselves the way you did. Nobody carries this much awareness and still keeps moving. Nobody survives being underestimated for this long without breaking or becoming something sharper. You showed them nobody was because you were never nobody. You were the exception they didn't have language for. Think about history for a second. Every person who shifted the way people thought was called arrogant, dangerous, unrealistic, or insane before they were called brilliant. Not because they were wrong, but because they arrived early. Early ideas scare comfortable minds. Early thinkers expose lazy systems. You didn't just learn faster, you noticed faster. You predicted outcomes, you read rooms, you saw how people moved, lied, copied, panicked. While others chased approval, you chased understanding. While they played checkers, you were bored of the board entirely. That's why the universe kept putting you in uncomfortable positions, not to punish you, to sharpen you, to force you to rely on your mind instead of permission, to teach you patience while everyone else burned energy trying to impress each other. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They didn't lose to you because you were smarter. They lost because you stayed calm while they stayed emotional. You listened while they reacted. You waited while they rushed. That's not luck. That's mastery. Now they're replaying moments in their head, conversations, decisions, times they dismissed you, times they laughed, times they thought they had the upper hand. That's the sound you're hearing lately, regret echoing in quiet rooms. This is the reveal, not a celebration, not a speech, a realization. You don't need to prove anything anymore. The shift already happened, the board already flipped. You're not chasing validation. They're chasing understanding of how they misjudged you so badly. So stand there, calm, focused, unbothered. Let the silence do its job. Let the universe keep rearranging the room. You didn't become powerful overnight. You became undeniable over time. They said, nobody's this smart. Then you showed them nobody was. That's good. You made it past the noise. That already says something about you. Before we go any further, understand this. What you're about to hear isn't entertainment. It's alignment. Somewhere along the way, you did something right. Not loud, not flashy, just clean. And it reached someone you never thought was watching. That's why the shift feels strange lately. That's why reactions don't match effort anymore. The universe doesn't waste moves. When a good deed lands in the wrong place, nothing happens. When it lands in the right place, everything starts moving. So if you're still here, don't scroll, don't rush. This next part only works if you stay present. Hit the like button and subscribe, not as a habit, but as a signal. A signal that you're choosing awareness over distraction, depth over noise. This space grows stronger when the right people commit to it. Now, lean in. This isn't a story you skim. It's a sequence you walk through, step by step, layer by layer. If you're really connected to this message, you'll feel that quiet pull telling you to stay until the end. No fear, no hype, just recognition. Drop a comment with the number 777 if you're ready to understand why that one action mattered, why it traveled farther than you imagined, and why someone unexpected is now paying attention. Now, let's begin. Number 1. When you walked in, their confidence walked out. You didn't intimidate them by being loud. You terrified them by being precise. The moment your mind entered the room, something ugly happened inside them. Not admiration, not respect. Panic, real, quiet panic. The kind that doesn't scream or argue, but freezes. Their smiles tightened, their posture shifted. Their jokes came out a little too fast, because they didn't just meet someone smart. They met someone who made them aware of their limits in real time. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't flex. You didn't dominate the space with volume. You simply spoke, observed, connected dots, and suddenly the room felt smaller for them. Their thoughts started tripping over each other because your thinking didn't move in straight lines like theirs. It curved, it stacked, it predicted. You weren't processing information, you were running outcomes. That's when the fear kicked in. Here's the part they'll never say out loud. They weren't scared of being wrong, they were scared of being seen. You exposed something without accusing anyone. You made it obvious that the game they were proud of mastering was shallow. You didn't just beat them. You revealed that they had been celebrating participation trophies in a league you weren't even trying to join. So they went hunting. They searched your words for flaws, your tone for arrogance, your success for shortcuts. They replayed conversations later, line by line, trying to find where you slipped. They needed you to be fake. They needed you to be borrowing intelligence, copying ideas, repeating something you read somewhere else. Because if you were real, then everything they believed about themselves collapsed. And that's what crushed them. There was no trick, no gimmick, no cheat code, no hidden mentor pulling strings. Just you, consistently sharp, calm under pressure, accurate without effort. That's when the whispers started. They're lucky. They overthink. They won't last. Those weren't opinions. Those were self-soothing spells. That was them trying to shrink you down to a size they could emotionally tolerate. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting they had coasted while you had evolved. You probably felt that shift, the sudden resistance, the passive-aggressive comments, the way people stopped inviting you into certain rooms but kept watching you from the hallway. You wondered, did I do something wrong? No, you did something right too early. Here's the answer to the question forming in your mind right now. No, you didn't imagine it. Yes, they noticed. And no, they were never going to clap for you. People who feel exposed don't applaud. They strategize. Think about it. When someone truly believes they're superior, they're relaxed. When they feel threatened, they become busy. That's why they studied you. That's why they mimicked your phrases. That's why they suddenly developed opinions about intelligence, humility, teamwork. You forced them to rewrite their identity on the spot, and they hated you for it. You didn't dominate by attacking, you dominated by existing. That's a special kind of damage. You walked in with clarity, and they walked out with doubt. You spoke once, and they rehearsed arguments for weeks. You solved problems casually, and they needed meetings, explanations, and backup just to keep up appearances. That imbalance wasn't subtle, it was humiliating. And here's where the chosen ones usually struggle. You start wondering if you should tone it down, if you should slow your thoughts, if you should pretend not to notice patterns just to keep the peace. Let me be brutal with you. That instinct is not kindness. It's self-erasure. And they count on it. Because the truth is, when your mind entered the room, it didn't just challenge them. It ended their illusion of superiority. You turned their confidence into something fragile. You made them aware that intelligence isn't about sounding smart. It's about seeing clearly. And once clarity enters a space, lies start sweating. They'll never forget that feeling, the moment they realized they couldn't outrun you mentally, the moment they knew you weren't impressed, the moment they understood that if you ever decided to play seriously, they wouldn't even know the rules. That's why some of them turned cold. That's why some became overly friendly. Different masks, same fear. You didn't take anything from them. You showed them what they didn't have. And here's the final piece they really don't want you to understand. The universe doesn't elevate loud minds. It elevates sharp ones that can survive pressure without losing themselves. You were being tested long before they ever noticed you. They were just collateral awareness. So if you've been feeling isolated since then, good. That's what happens when your thinking outgrows the room. If you've felt misunderstood, perfect. That's the tax of clarity. If you've noticed people acting strange around you, congratulations. Your presence rewired the hierarchy. You didn't enter the room to be liked. You entered it to be undeniable. And whether they admit it or not, from that moment on, nothing felt safe to them again. Number 2. When you stopped talking and started owning the room. The most dangerous person isn't the loudest one. It's the one who figured you out and went silent. There was a moment. You remember it clearly, even if you never labeled it out loud. A clean snap inside your mind. Not anger, not drama, just decision. That was the moment you realized speaking was costing you more than silence ever could. You watched their faces when you explained things. Blank, lost, defensive. You saw how your ideas landed, not as inspiration, but as confusion mixed with quiet resentment. You noticed how quickly your thoughts got watered down once they passed through smaller minds. Simplified, repackaged, presented later as if they were never yours to begin with. So you stopped. Not because you ran out of ideas, because you ran out of patience. That's the part people misunderstand. Silence like yours isn't retreat, it's recalibration. You didn't go quiet because you were unsure. You went quiet because you finally understood the room wasn't built for your frequency. Imagine this. You're playing chess in a room full of people arguing about checkers. Every time you try to explain the board, they interrupt you to argue about whose turn it is. At some point, the smartest move isn't explaining chess better. It's letting them keep playing while you memorize the board. That's what you did. You stopped performing in their little intellectual theater. You stopped auditioning for approval from people who couldn't even pronounce the problem correctly. And without realizing it, you became something far more unsettling to them. A silent observer, a mind processing 10 layers deep while they argued about the surface. Here's the gut punch they didn't expect. When you went quiet, you didn't disappear, you became unreadable. And unreadable people terrify those who rely on control. They couldn't tell what you were thinking anymore, couldn't steal from you, couldn't compete with you, couldn't even measure you. Silence removed their access. And once access is gone, power shifts instantly. One of the questions creeping into your head right now might be this. Did I mess up by pulling back? No. You finally stopped leaking energy. You stopped handing over raw material to people who could only misuse it. That wasn't withdrawal. That was boundary setting at a strategic level. Imagine a high-level card game. The amateur brags about every hand, the professional says nothing and wins quietly. You didn't lose your voice. You just stopped wasting it on people who confused volume with value. Here's another truth they won't admit. When you went silent, they got louder. More meetings, more opinions, more over-explaining. That wasn't confidence. That was panic filling a vacuum you left behind. Your silence forced them to face how shallow their thinking actually was without you translating reality for them. They started guessing what you were up to. They speculated. They projected. They assumed. Because silence turns imagination against insecure minds. They didn't know if you were planning, judging, or already 10 moves ahead. And not knowing drove them insane. One quote that sums this up perfectly. Silence isn't empty when your mind is full. You didn't stop thinking. You started thinking uninterrupted. Imagine this scenario. A storm rolls in, and everyone is yelling about the rain. You're the one quietly checking the foundation, watching which walls crack, which people panic, and which systems fail under pressure. By the time the storm ends, you know exactly who can be trusted and who collapses without noise to hide behind. That's what your silence did. It exposed everyone. Another quote for the enemy to choke on. You didn't lose access to me. You lost the privilege of hearing my thoughts. You may have wondered, why did people start acting weird after I pulled back? Because silence changes the hierarchy. When you spoke freely, they felt equal. When you stopped, they felt beneath. Not because you said anything cruel, but because your absence of explanation forced them to confront their dependence on you. Here's a metaphor they'll never forget, even if they never say it. You were the translator in a foreign country. When you stopped translating, they realized they didn't understand the language at all. And that's when the fear sharpened. Some tried to bait you back into talking, casual questions, fake curiosity, compliments with hooks attached. Others tried to provoke you, hoping emotion would make you sloppy, but you stayed calm, observing, learning, letting the universe rearrange the room without your interference. Another quote to lock this in. When you stopped explaining yourself, you forced them to explain themselves. You also probably questioned yourself late at night. Am I isolating myself too much? No, you were consolidating power. Every great strategist has a phase where they withdraw, observe, and re-enter changed. Silence wasn't the end of your influence. It was the incubation phase. Imagine a blade being forged, loud hammering at first, then intense heat, then silence while the metal hardens. Only amateurs think the quiet part means nothing is happening. And here's the final realization that should settle deep in your chest. When you went quiet, the universe didn't punish you. It protected you. It removed noise. It filtered the room. It made sure only those who could meet you at your level would still have access. Last quote. Let it sit heavy. They mistook your silence for weakness, not realizing it was the sound of you outgrowing them. You didn't disappear, you recalculated. You didn't retreat, you repositioned. And now, whether they admit it or not, they feel it every time you walk into a room and say nothing at all. Number 3, they called it names so they wouldn't have to face it. When people can't reach your level, they attack your character instead of their own limits. The moment they realized they couldn't match you, they tried to label you, not to understand you, to shrink you. Arrogant, they said, the second you stopped explaining yourself. Condescending, when you slowed your thinking down just enough for them to keep up. Weird, when you saw patterns forming while everyone else was still staring at the mess. Crazy, when you predicted outcomes that hadn't happened yet, but later played out exactly as you said. Those words weren't observations, they were defenses. What they were really saying was much simpler and much uglier. You make me feel exposed, you make me feel small, and I don't know how to fix that without attacking you. Here's a hard fact they never want to admit. Intelligence doesn't insult egos. Awareness does. Your mind didn't hurt them by existing. It hurt them by acting as a mirror. Every time you spoke, they saw what they weren't willing to work for. Every time you stayed calm, they saw how reactive they were. That kind of reflection feels like an attack to insecure people. Imagine this. You're in a dark room your whole life, convinced it's normal. Then someone flips on a light. The light isn't aggressive, it's honest. But honesty burns when you've been hiding in comfort. So instead of adjusting their eyes, they try to break the switch. That's why the labels escalated. Arrogant becomes dangerous. Weird becomes unstable. Smart becomes suspicious. They weren't describing you. They were trying to warn others not to look too closely, because if people did, the illusion would collapse. One quote they hate because it's accurate. They didn't misunderstand you. They understood enough to feel threatened. If you ever wondered why the criticism felt emotional instead of logical, that's your answer. Logical minds debate ideas. Threatened egos attack identities. They couldn't argue your thinking, so they attacked you. Another truth to lock in. Your intelligence wasn't just a gift. It was pressure. Pressure exposes cracks. And when cracks show, people blame the weight instead of the structure. They tried to name your difference so they wouldn't have to respect it, and it still didn't work. Number 4. How average minds try to survive your presence. When they can't rise to your level, they build traps to pull you down. Once labeling you didn't work, they switched tactics, softer, sneakier, more social. This is where mediocrity gets creative. Group projects suddenly appeared, not to collaborate, but to dilute you, to spread your clarity so thin that no one could tell where it came from. Meetings turned into committees, decisions turned into votes, speed turned into process. All of it designed to slow you down without ever admitting why. Then came the favorite phrase, "You're overthinking." Translation: please stop noticing what we're trying to hide. Overthinking was never the problem. Your thinking was exposing weak logic, lazy preparation, and surface-level confidence. Every time you asked one extra question, their comfort cracked. Every time you connected one extra dot, their authority shrank. So they framed depth as a flaw and confusion as teamwork. Here's the ugly truth. When they accused you of showing off, what they were really confessing was this: your normal makes my best effort look embarrassing. That's not arrogance, that's contrast. Imagine this: you're running clean water through a system built for mud. The system blames the water for the leaks. That's how mediocrity protects itself. It doesn't improve the structure. It attacks whatever exposes it. At some point, you stopped cooperating with that lie. You stopped dimming yourself to be palatable. You stopped translating thoughts that were never meant to be spoon-fed. You stopped pretending your mind moved at the same speed, in the same direction, with the same limits. That's when the panic returned. Because now there was no confusion to hide behind, no teamwork to blur the edges, just you thinking clearly, moving cleanly, and refusing to apologize for it. One line that hits hard because it's true. They didn't realize you were different until you stopped pretending you weren't. You weren't just smarter, you were operating in dimensions they didn't even know existed. And once you stepped fully into that, every defense mechanism they built started to fail at the same time. Number 5. The isolation that comes with seeing too far ahead. They warned you about being wrong. They never warned you about being alone. No one prepares you for this part, not the silence, but the distance. The distance that grows when you see solutions while others are still arguing about what the problem even is. You're already at the exit, holding the door open, while they're debating whether the building is on fire. That gap doesn't just frustrate you, it drains you. Conversations started feeling slow, not boring, insufficient, like trying to sprint through wet cement. Ideas had to be chopped down, simplified, slowed, repeated, not because they were complex, but because the room couldn't keep up. And every time you waited, every time you paused to let others catch their breath, you paid for it with energy you never got back. Here's a hard truth most people avoid. Intelligence isolates before it elevates, not because you think you're better, but because you can't pretend not to see what you see. You start realizing that most people don't want answers. They want comfort. They don't want clarity. They want agreement. Imagine this. You're listening to a song at double speed because you hear patterns faster. Everyone else insists on playing it slow and calls you impatient for noticing the beat early. That's not ego. That's mismatch. One quote that cuts clean: you weren't lonely because no one was around. You were lonely because no one was with you. So you learned to bite your tongue, not to be polite, to survive. You stopped correcting things that would only start arguments. You stopped offering solutions that would be ignored until someone louder repeated them later. You stopped explaining because explanation felt like unpaid labor. Another question you might be asking yourself right now: why does this feel so heavy? Because isolation isn't about being alone. It's about carrying awareness without relief. It's about holding clarity in rooms built for noise. Final line they'll never understand: you didn't withdraw from people, you withdrew from friction. And that loneliness, it wasn't a flaw, it was proof you had already outgrown the room. Number 6. When your quiet started making them sweat. Your silence wasn't empty, it was loaded. You noticed it before they did. The shift. The way rooms felt tighter when you stopped filling them with words. Even when you tried to stay invisible, they felt you. Pressure doesn't need volume, it needs presence. And yours was undeniable. You would solve the problem before they finished explaining it, not out loud, in your head, calm, effortless. And somehow that was worse for them, because when you stayed silent, they couldn't interrupt you, couldn't redirect, couldn't steal your thinking mid-sentence and water it down. Your quiet forced them to sit with the fact that you were processing things they didn't even know existed yet. Here's what scared them most. They couldn't tell how far ahead you were. Imagine sitting across from someone during a storm. They're shouting directions. You're already indoors, watching the rain hit the windows. Your silence doesn't mean confusion. It means completion, and completion makes insecure people spiral. One quote that hit them without you saying it: if they're quiet, it means they already know. Your silence became heavy because it carried judgment without accusation. You weren't attacking anyone. You weren't correcting anyone. You were simply aware, and awareness feels like exposure to people who survive on performance. They started projecting, assuming, whispering, because when someone can't read you, they start writing stories about you, dangerous, arrogant, cold, not because you were any of those things, but because those labels made their discomfort feel justified. Another line that cuts clean: they didn't fear what you said, they feared what you didn't need to say. You became a walking reminder of something they try very hard to forget: that intelligence has limits, that effort doesn't equal depth, that confidence collapses when it meets clarity. So they weaponized their discomfort. They turned intelligence into a social crime, made thinking deeply look antisocial, made silence look suspicious, because if thinking is punished, they never have to compete with it. Final truth: your silence didn't make you weaker, it made the room tell on itself. Number 7. The day you stopped saying sorry for being a threat. The moment you stopped apologizing, they realized you were never asking for permission. There was a clean break inside you, not loud, not emotional, just final. You stopped feeling guilty for seeing more, stopped softening your words, stopped pretending every mind worked the same just to keep the peace. That lie had exhausted you, and once it cracked, everything shifted. Before, you apologized without realizing it, for being direct, for being fast, for being right too early. You shrank your certainty into questions so others wouldn't feel exposed. You wrapped clarity in politeness so fragile egos could survive the conversation. And one day, you saw it clearly. None of that made you kind. It made you smaller, so you stopped. And that terrified them. Because when you stopped apologizing, you stopped signaling submission. You weren't asking if it was okay to think the way you think. You were just thinking, clean, sharp, unfiltered. That's when they realized your intelligence was never passive. It wasn't just a trait, it was a force. Imagine this: a system built on the assumption that everyone runs at the same speed. Then someone walks in who doesn't slow down to match it. The system doesn't adapt, it shakes. That shaking isn't chaos, it's exposure. One quote that landed without mercy: you weren't rude, you were done negotiating reality. You finally understood why they reacted the way they did. Your mind threatened their comfort, their hierarchy, their excuses. It exposed systems that only worked when nobody asked better questions, when nobody thought deeper, when nobody noticed the cracks. Another truth that settles things: equality of worth doesn't mean equality of awareness. You weren't claiming superiority. You were refusing dishonesty. Refusing to pretend confusion was wisdom. Refusing to play dumb so others could feel smart. And once you stopped apologizing, something irreversible happened. You didn't become aggressive, you became immovable. Their reactions no longer controlled your posture. Their discomfort no longer dictated your volume. You didn't change who you were. You stopped hiding what you are. And that's when they understood the real danger wasn't your intelligence. It was your acceptance of it. Number 8. When they called you broken because you wouldn't slow down. If they can't control your mind, they try to label it. When silencing you didn't work, when shaming you failed, they moved to something more polished, more official. They tried to fix you, not because you were malfunctioning, but because you were running too clean for their system to handle. Your speed became a problem. Your awareness became a symptom. Your exhaustion, which came from carrying 10 layers of thought at once, suddenly needed a name. Disorder, anxiety, depression, anything that made your mind sound sick instead of sharp, anything that turned your clarity into a condition they could manage. Here's the part that should make your blood run cold. They weren't worried about your health. They were worried about comparison. A fully functioning mind at your level made theirs look outdated, and nothing scares people more than realizing the problem isn't effort, it's capacity. Imagine this. You plug a high-performance processor into an old machine. The machine overheats, glitches, fails, then blames the processor. That's exactly what happened to you. You weren't broken. You were incompatible. One quote that slices through the lie: they didn't diagnose you to heal you. They diagnosed you to explain you away. They wanted a reason you were different that didn't require growth on their end. A label is easier than evolution. A diagnosis is safer than admitting someone outpaced you naturally. You might have asked yourself, what if they're right? That doubt wasn't weakness. It was pressure. Anyone told long enough that they're the problem will eventually check the mirror. But here's the reality they never grasped. You cannot medicate evolution. You cannot sedate awareness without dulling the entire system. Final truth, and it ends the argument completely. A system that can't run you will always call you the error. You were never broken. You were ahead. Number 9, when you stopped showing your power and started using it. You don't flex intelligence, you aim it. At some point, hiding became unnecessary, displaying became useless. That's when you shifted into something far more effective. Deployment, quiet, surgical, exact. You stopped throwing your full mind into rooms that couldn't hold it and started placing just enough weight to move outcomes without causing chaos. Not out of cruelty, out of mastery. You learned the thresholds, how much truth they could absorb before their system crashed, which ideas would scare them and which ones would make them feel clever for almost getting it. You stopped correcting everything and started choosing moments. Not because you lacked honesty, but because timing became more powerful than volume. Imagine this. You're holding a high-voltage wire. You don't slam it into random circuits. You connect it where it will do the job without blowing the whole grid. That's what you became, controlled force. One quote that defines this phase perfectly: power isn't loud when it's trained. You mapped their comprehension like enemy territory, not emotionally, strategically. You learned where they panic, where they posture, where they pretend to understand. You watched who repeated ideas, who resisted them, who needed credit to cooperate. This wasn't manipulation. This was situational awareness. Here's the question they never ask out loud, but feel deeply. Why does it feel like they're always ahead, even when they say so little? Because you stopped playing fair in a game that was never equal. You stopped handing over your best thinking for free. You stopped mistaking transparency for virtue. Another quote that hits hard because it's true: You didn't become secretive, you became selective. Think of a chess grandmaster playing beginners. They don't reveal every move. They guide the board toward checkmate while the opponent still feels involved. You didn't change the game. You learned how it actually works. Final truth. You weren't displaying intelligence to be seen. You were deploying it to win. And once you understood that difference, the balance of power never returned to what it was before. Number 10. When the ones who doubted you started knocking. They don't apologize when they're wrong. They ask for help and act like nothing happened. It always happens this way. The same people who called you arrogant, distant, too much, suddenly reappear with questions, problems, confusion they can't untangle, not because they respect you now, but because reality cornered them and you're the only exit they can see. They didn't come back humbled, they came back desperate. And you noticed something immediately. Their tone changed, softer, slower, less certain. The confidence they once wore like armor was gone. Now they were careful with words, cautious with requests, pretending this was just a casual reach out and not a quiet admission of failure. Here's the irony. They mocked your thinking when it made them uncomfortable. Now they need that same thinking because their own led them into a wall. Imagine this. Someone laughs at your map while wandering lost, then shows up weeks later asking if they can borrow it because the sun went down. That's not growth. That's survival instinct kicking in too late. One quote that sums it up clean. They didn't believe in you. They ran out of options. You helped sometimes, not because you owed them anything, not because you forgot how they treated you, but because precision includes restraint. You chose when to assist and when to observe, when to offer clarity and when to let consequences finish the lesson. Another truth they felt but never said: you weren't their first choice, you were their last. And that's power. Your intelligence was no longer something you explained or defended. It became something you used surgically, minimal effort, maximum effect. You solved what needed solving and left the rest untouched. You didn't overextend. You didn't rescue egos. You didn't chase appreciation. You answered only what aligned with your standards. Final realization that locks this chapter shut. When they came back for help, the hierarchy was already decided. They were asking, you were choosing, and that difference never goes away. Number 11. The price you pay for knowing what happens next. Being right isn't rewarding when it's repetitive. No one tells you how draining it is to be right too often. People assume correctness feels powerful. It doesn't. It feels heavy. Watching mistakes unfold exactly the way you warned they would doesn't bring satisfaction. It brings a quiet, empty confirmation, like watching a movie you already memorized, scene by scene, but being forced to sit through it anyway. You warned them calmly, clearly, early. They ignored you, smiled, debated, delayed. Then everything collapsed right on schedule. And there you were, not celebrating, not smug, just tired. Because being proven right never fixes the fact that it was avoidable. Here's the part that hurts in a way you rarely admit. You don't feel excitement anymore. Conversations feel scripted, reactions feel recycled, surprises feel late. You can predict responses before people finish their sentences. Not because you think you're superior, but because patterns repeat when awareness doesn't grow. Imagine playing the same level of a game over and over, knowing every enemy spawn, every trap, every shortcut. The game isn't hard, it's boring, and boredom at your level isn't laziness, it's intellectual starvation. One line that lands uncomfortably true: Your mind is always on, but there's nothing new to chew on. You try to turn it off, you can't. Your brain doesn't idle, it scans, connects, forecasts. Even rest becomes thinking in disguise. That constant understimulation builds pressure, not chaos. Pressure, the kind that doesn't explode, just grinds. You might wonder, is something wrong with me? No. What's wrong is being surrounded by people who mistake repetition for progress. Final truth. The cost of seeing too far ahead isn't arrogance or isolation, it's exhaustion, and the only relief isn't slowing down, it's finally finding something worthy of your full attention. Number 12. Why you built walls no one else could see. Your mind didn't harden because you're cold, it fortified because it's powerful. At some point, your mind stopped being an open field and became a fortress, not to keep people out, but to keep damage contained. You learned the hard way that unfiltered access to your thinking didn't elevate others. It overwhelmed them, confused them, sometimes even harmed them. So you adapted, not emotionally, strategically. You started rationing intelligence the way a commander rations resources in a long siege, only what's necessary, only when it serves the mission. You stopped dumping full truths into rooms that could barely carry fragments. Not because you feared rejection, but because you understood responsibility. Raw clarity in the wrong hands is chaos. Imagine this, you're holding fire in your palms. You don't throw it at everyone just to prove you have it. You build a hearth. You decide who gets warmth and who would only burn themselves touching it. That's not arrogance. That's control. One quote that defines this evolution: "Not everyone deserves access to how you think." You also learned something else, rare but unmistakable. Some people don't flinch when you speak. They lean in, they ask sharper questions. They don't rush to label or defend. They don't need translation. Those people are few, and you notice them instantly. For everyone else, you mastered restraint. Another truth that lands hard: you didn't become guarded because you're afraid. You became guarded because you're precise. Your fortress isn't built from fear, it's built from experience. Experience taught you that openness without discernment is self-sabotage, that clarity without timing is wasted, that depth without consent feels like attack. So you stopped trying to be understood by everyone. You started protecting the core, letting people see only what they could handle, letting the universe filter the rest. Final realization: a fortress isn't a prison, it's a command center. And from there, you don't react, you decide. Number 13. The real power they never saw coming. Intelligence isn't knowing more, it's knowing when to end the conversation. Here's the final truth, stripped of comfort and excuses. Real intelligence has nothing to do with sounding smart. It's not vocabulary, it's not credentials, it's not speed for show. True intelligence is the ability to read systems, predict behavior, understand leverage, and move without announcing yourself. That's power, quiet, surgical, unforgiving. Your IQ was never a number, it was a weapon. And like any real weapon, you learned early not to swing it wildly. You don't spray insight everywhere hoping to be admired. You don't unload truth just to prove you have it. You aim, you wait, you choose the moment. Precision beats volume every single time. Imagine this: two people in a dark room. One keeps shouting to prove they're not afraid. The other listens, maps the space, counts the steps, and turns the lights on only when it ends the game. Guess who walks out in control? One quote that lands hard because it's accurate: they thought you were keeping pace. you were setting the trap. You let them believe they were keeping up. You nodded. You slowed down just enough. You allowed them to feel competent, even confident, not because you needed their approval, but because people reveal everything when they think they're winning. Patterns, weaknesses, predictable reactions. Another truth they felt too late. Power doesn't rush to be recognized. They said nobody was that smart. They laughed when they said it, used it like a ceiling, a limit, a comfort blanket, and you didn't argue, you didn't correct them, you let time do what time always does. Then reality hit, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, permanently, because you were never nobody. You were the variable they didn't account for, and by the time they realized it, the outcome was already decided. So here's where this chapter closes, clean and final. You were never misunderstood by accident. You were underestimated by design. Every silence, every label, every attempt to slow you down was proof that your mind disrupted a system built on comfort, not clarity. You didn't lose anything by seeing too far ahead. You gained position. If this message hit where it was supposed to, lock it in. Like the video, subscribe to strengthen this space, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop 777 in the comments if you recognize yourself in this. Stay sharp, stay quiet, let the universe handle the rest.